church. Good morning. I'm going to make sure I speak nice and loud in here. Despite being a technology person, sometimes I worry about using the microphone. I hope I sound loud and clear. I hope that if you've joined us on our live stream that you can hear. Sounds a little bit louder, so that's good. I also want to throw a disclaimer out there. I was not able to get my slides up here on this TV, ran out of time. But hopefully you can see on the screens here, and hopefully you can see online. It's a messy morning, but it's bright and cheerful in here. I'm so glad that we get to worship together, and I'm so glad I get to share a quick little lesson. Well, I say the word quick, but a lesson for you. I try to start my lessons off with a little bit of humor, but Brother David beat me to it. I just don't think I can beat his comedic timing. So, but here we are with the lesson, and I hope this will be beneficial to you. I want you to know something, and I mean this very sincerely. I love getting to teach the teen class. We're small, but we're mighty, and I've really enjoyed preparing lessons for our teens. I love our teens. I can tell that they're listening and learning. They make great comments. They read Bible verses. And the past year and a half or so, I really have felt that we've grown together with our studies. The past 3 months, on Sundays and Wednesdays, we have been studying a series that I've called The Identity of Jesus. And it started off, I used a series that I had purchased from a church in Arkansas, and I kind of gradually moved away from the study and just started brainstorming different qualities of Jesus that I wanted the students to understand and think about. And I came up with quite a bit. I didn't intend for this to be a long study, but it was a deep study. And we're about to finish it up probably Wednesday night unless I think of something else. But we've studied things like Jesus the shepherd. Jesus is the bread of life. Jesus is the way. Jesus was non-materialistic. Jesus was human. And then we had one lesson a couple weeks ago, Jesus the teacher. And that was one of my favorite studies because part of it, that's my profession, but also it really opened our eyes to see that Jesus was the master teacher, and he was a beautiful teacher. And so what I want to think about this morning is his example and think about how we can apply it to ourselves. Now, don't panic. Don't worry. I'm not challenging you all to be a teacher in the formal sense, but we all do have the responsibility to be a teacher, whether it be through our example to the world or through our conversation and through just our interactions, whether it be at work, at school, out in the community. We do have that responsibility to connect to people and to reach to people. So that's the context I really want you to think about this morning as we go through this lesson. So I want you to think back to a teacher that impacted you. And I know in previous lessons, I've talked about teachers. 2 sermons ago, I embarrassed myself and told you a story about how I sent an anonymous letter to a teacher. I got a little ribbing out of that, but I deserved it. But also, I've been very blessed to have so many great teachers in my life, not just teachers at school, but teachers in Bible classes and preachers. Specifically, 2 teachers I had in high school. One I think about was my math teacher. She taught me Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 for 3 years. And this was at Munich American High School. And I'm strong in those areas, except maybe geometry, because I've never really used that in real life. But I'm strong in those areas because of her. But it wasn't necessarily the reason that she was a great teacher because she connected with her students. She was very personable. She wasn't our best friend, but she cared about us. And I actually reached out to her several years ago and told her my story, and she was amazed that I was a teacher myself, but I was amazed that she remembered me. And she said, I think of you every Christmas when I put that ornament on the tree that you gave me that one year. Of course, I didn't remember that. I know Mom had probably sent that, and I gave it to her. But it was neat to see that she remembered me, too. Now, on the flip side, Munich American High School closed. The base there closed, and my dad was transferred to Nuremberg American High School. And so I was uneasy about, what kind of math teacher was I going to have that senior year. And my worry was justified because the very first day of school, I had a teacher who literally said if he had to do it again, he would not be a teacher. So you can imagine how that year went. I was disappointed. It was trigonometry, and to this day, I can't stand trigonometry. I tutor students in trigonometry with the help of Google and ChatGPT. I make it through, but that student I tutor is probably more therapy than anything. But thinking about those two contrasts of teachers really establishes the value of a great teacher. And of course, we can think about Christ being a great teacher. Good teachers are special because they make an impact. And in just a minute, we'll look at Matthew 5, 1 through 2 together. But teachers, they make an impact not necessarily academically, but because they connect to people. They connect to their students. And you can tell that they are sincere and generally care about their students. I think about another teacher I had in 5th grade, Mrs. Brown. I don't really remember what I learned in 5th grade, but I remember that we would have popcorn parties on Friday. She had a little game called the M&M game that I ended up using for my students. So yeah, food is what I remember from 5th grade. But I remember her just being generally nice and friendly and kind. Again, teachers make an impact through connections, and they're personable. Let's look at Matthew 5, 1 through 2, and you'll see that this clearly establishes Jesus as a teacher. And we had a great study from Daniel a while back on the Beatitudes, and you could see that the content was so rich. Matthew 5, 1 through 2 says, seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them. This passage clearly establishes that Jesus was a teacher. And that's not a surprise to you. That's not a shock. But you can see one of Jesus' purposes was to reach people and to teach them, whether it be in this instance, but also through his example and just conversations with people and through healing people. We know Jesus was here to teach people. But also notice here, this was not formal. I think we can draw attention to the fact that Jesus sat down and was among the people. That's a great style of teaching. That's one I like to do when, especially with the teens, we sit together, and it helps open up discussion. But also, you can see the actions that were involved here. What did he do? He opened up his mouth and taught them. So that shows you that teaching is not a fancy presentation. It's not something for show. It's just a matter of connecting to the people. Jesus was a great teacher. Clearly, we know that because of the impact we see even today. And the world needs good teachers. And that's why we have the responsibility
to reach the world through teaching, whether it be our example and through our conversation. The world, generally speaking, is constantly hunting for answers. And the world's going to find those answers wherever they look. And I hope that you're part of the place that they look, the people that you interact with. They see, oh, you're a Christian. I see your example. Or tell me about the church that you're a part of. I'd love to know more. A small spark like that can be a great example of teaching. We can help point to the answer of Christ. And so, thinking about how Christ was a teacher and the master teacher, there's just a few things I want us to consider when it comes to teaching and teaching itself. The first thing I want to think about with you is that teachers must know what their students need. Again, this is nothing profound, but it's so important that a teacher is teaching the content and the material that they need to grow further. Thinking about the field of education. When I taught 3rd and 4th grade, I knew there's an Alabama course of study, and I needed to use 3rd grade. Clearly, I wasn't going to jump and go to 9th grade. That wouldn't be appropriate. Or when I taught technology, wasn't going to flip to the section on Alabama history necessarily, because that wouldn't have the content that I knew I would be responsible for to teach the students. Well, the same thing is true when we're reaching the world and we're teaching each other or teaching those that don't know Christ yet. I mean, obviously, it would be ridiculous to talk to someone about Christ and then say, hey, you want to study Song of Solomon with me? Yes, there's a time and a place to study that, but not in that moment. I've visited many churches throughout my life. That's just part of the nature of being a military brat. But I can remember sitting through some Bible classes thinking, how is this useful to me at this moment? I can think back to sitting and listening to people read outlines about the history of the Old Testament. And yes, it's rich. But I can remember thinking, I can't wrap my head around this. I can't see how I need to connect to this right now. Maybe later as I get older. But it's so important to think about that content. That's what I love about teaching the teens. I've hoped that we've had content that's relative to them and things that they need to know, like the identity of Jesus, or some of our past studies where we've studied about how Christians can manage money, or how Christians can deal with mental health, or how teens and Christians can deal with technology. Things that I know that they need, because those things can challenge them, and I want them to be strong enough to overcome any issues that they may face. Teachers must know what their students need. And that goes back to thinking about how God and Christ knew what people needed. From Matthew 6:8, and I know this is pulled out of the context from praying to God, but you see it establishes that God and Christ know what we need. Your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. So when Christ was teaching, He knew what the people needed. And generally speaking, from the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, Christ is telling those followers, that crowd, on how to live life. So practical. I'm a big fan of practical lessons. And that's what I love about Daniel's lessons, because we'll take something like Jonah and He'll make it practical for us, or judges that I never really considered to be practical, and He would show us, hey, here's how it applies to you. You see, sometimes just knowing the content is not as good as applying the content. That's what good teachers do. That's what Christ was challenging the people with. He was telling them, okay, it's not good enough just to know these things, but what about your heart? How's your heart into it? Are you realizing that if you're facing sin, that there's a heart problem? And are you realizing that maybe the way you interact with people, like your enemies, that you shouldn't be retaliating, you should be praying for them? You know, wow, that's so backwards. But Christ knew the people needed to open up their eyes and to realize that, hey, maybe I need this content. Christ knows what I need. That's what good teachers do. We can impact the world by teaching that Jesus provides answers. The Word of God provides answers. And it's important that we help the world to see that even though you see things among the world that provides temporary answers and feel-good answers, God's answers in the Word is permanent. And it's not temporary, and it's not a quick fix. It's the fix that we need. So remember that good teachers know what their students need. A second thing, teachers must know how to reach their students. If you're like me, and you're thinking back to your elementary years, the typical classroom back then had a chalkboard and desks, and that was probably about it. I remember that's how my classrooms were. Today, I don't even know if classrooms have chalkboards. There's so much more. And part of it is because today's generation learns differently with different tools. And we have whiteboards and smart boards and Chromebooks, different tools to help students learn. That's one thing we have to consider, is maybe the way we learned years ago when we were in school may not be necessarily how children and students learn today. Things do change. In fact, Addie, one of the very first papers she wrote her freshman year, addressed some of these things on how different generations learn. Today's generation is very visual. And I think that's why Exposure Youth Camp is so popular. Very visual setting on stage, and things to follow along, just like we have here with slide presentations. I can remember the very first time I sat through a sermon with a slide presentation and thinking, wow, this is weird. This is different. And then the more I thought about it, I thought, wow, what a great tool to help people follow the lesson a little bit better and to see the verses. And so we've got to consider the way that we reach our learners, the way we reach our students, and keep in the back of our mind that, yeah, just because it worked for me years ago, that may not be readily accepted in the same way. Taking a look at John 8:12 kind of addresses this in a way, especially when it comes to the message itself. John 8:12 says, Jesus spoke to them again, I am the light of the world. Anyone who follows me will never walk in darkness, but have the light of life. The beauty of Jesus' teaching was so positive. And that's how we can connect to people. As you know, my grandmother passed away last month, and I always think about her life and the things that she told me. She did not grow up within the Church of Christ, and my grandfather studied with her. And one thing, though, that I remember her telling me is that when she was growing up, there was some people that came by from a local Church of Christ and wanted to talk to the family, and said pretty directly to her, well, that if you're not coming to a Church of Christ, well, you're going to hell. I thought, wow, it's embarrassing. That's not how you connect to people. Jesus never did that with people. He got pretty angry at the Pharisees and the way they behaved. But when he talked and taught the woman at the well and examples like that, very personable, and was not very harsh and direct in that way. He talked to the person and showed that there was love and was positive. That needs to be the way that we connect to people and teach people. Show that being a Christian and a follower of Christ is a positive experience, and that you love them and you want them to feel that this positive energy as well, because being a child of God is a great thing. We've got to be aware of how we connect to people. That's what teaching is all about. That's what I've tried to stress in my stories and in these verses. Jesus connected to people. That's how we change the world. That's how we grow, whether it be spiritually or in numbers. We connect to people, and we show the world, not for our own glory, for God's glory, that we're positive, kind, generous, friendly, loving people. That's what the world needs to see from us, and that's how we can teach the world. Make a connection, a positive connection. So, as we continue with this, we've talked about how teachers need to know what the students need and how to connect to those students and learners. Well, the final thing we need to think about is teachers need to know how to reflect. And that really boils down to thinking about this one question. Is what I'm doing working? Why or why not? Because if what we're doing is not working, maybe we need to tweak it and do better. That's what good teachers do. I'm a national board certified teacher, and one thing I had to do when I initially certified in 2008 is I had a paper to write and reflect upon my teaching. Whether it be, I failed at this lesson, or I succeeded this lesson, or some of both. And I had to go through and think, okay, why did this happen? Was it something I was doing? Or how can I do better? That's what teachers should do. And that should apply to us as well. Well, if what I'm doing is not working, maybe I need to change. Am I doing nothing? Maybe I need to start doing something. Am I scaring people away? Is my example too a negative that people don't want to be a Christian? We've got to really dig into our own lives and think, what's going on? And am I making a difference, or should I be making a difference? Sometimes those are uncomfortable questions. Going back to the idea of reflecting, I remember I got to coach Lila's softball teams growing up. I'm not athletic. I didn't know the basics really well. I would pick assistant coaches that were good at that. I couldn't pitch. I tried pitching once with one of my nieces, and I hit her right in the gut, and she ran off crying. She got me back. I practiced again with her later, and she smacked one, and it hit me right here, and she laughed about that. But I kind of was good at motivating kids to play and I liked picking kids for the best positions. I was pretty good at drafting teams. Several of the teams that I coached, we were first place, and so picking the right people was maybe something I was pretty good at. And then the batting order. I probably stressed over the batting order way too much, thinking about who hit well the last game and things like that. But then, Joshua was playing baseball. He's playing again. And there's been a couple coaches that I thought, why is he using the same batting order over and over again? And there was even one team where the second batter was out every time, struck out every time. I thought, Coach, tweak that some. Now, I never said that, but I thought if I were the coach, I would try to do differently. But I wasn't the coach. It was up to him. But thinking about coaching made me reflect as well. Was what I was doing, did I put the girls in the right position? Was I motivating them? That's another example of reflection. Teachers, coaches, and you should reflect upon yourself and notice who you are. Matthew 7, 3 through 5 has, and some of these translations may say look, but I want to read from, I think this is the English Standard Version, from Matthew 7, 3 through 5. And this is specifically talking about judging others, so you're familiar with this passage. But one of the verses reminds us that you've got to look at yourself first. Why do you look at the splinter in your brother's eye, but don't notice the beam of wood in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the splinter out of your eye, and look, and there's a beam of wood in your own eye? Hypocrite. First take the beam of wood out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to take the splinter out of your brother's eye. So there's the word notice. That's what reflection is about. Are you noticing your own life, the way you interact with people, and the way you talk to people about your Christian walk and the way you live your life? Do you notice your example? That's what reflection is all about. I want to look at another passage with you about this from James 1:22. I have part of the verse on the screen, but I do want to read the whole verse to you. So starting in James 1:22, we'll see that there's an illustration of a mirror. James 1:22. Get that pulled up here. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. Because if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like someone looking at his own face in the mirror. For he looks at himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of person he was. So you see the illustration of a mirror, and we often use mirrors in our daily life to look at our physical self. And we think, okay, is my hair sticking up? Do I have stuff stuck in my teeth? Or is there something on my face? We use those mirrors to reflect upon our physical looks. Well, in the same way, we need to reflect upon our spiritual way and the way we live our lives and how we reach people. Sometimes that's uncomfortable when we're not doing our best, but that's okay. That's an opportunity to turn it around and to do better. Reflection is not a negative thing. It's an opportunity to fix yourself. So just remember that with reflection, that's a key component of being a great teacher. Now, going back to Jesus, he didn't necessarily need to reflect because he was the perfect teacher. He was the teacher that the world needed. And what he did proved that he was a master teacher. Christ was a perfect example of a teacher. He taught in the moment. He connected to people. And we can too, because the world needs us. We have the opportunity to change the world by being a teacher. We can apply these principles in the way that we live our lives, even in the smallest ways. Aren't you glad that Jesus is our teacher? And aren't you glad that there is no opportunity to criticize the way that he taught or what he taught? Because what he did was out of love. And he came to change the world. I hope that you've pulled something out of this lesson about Jesus the teacher. I know nothing profound, but I hope it's been motivating to you regarding who Christ was and how we can live our lives. So this lesson is yours. I know we always extend an invitation, especially, if you've been struggling, you need prayers for strength. This is not a time for embarrassment or shame. This is a time for us to pray for you. But don't leave here today if you're struggling without talking to someone, because we love you and we want to pray with you and we want to encourage you and motivate you. But if you have any need at this time, we're here for you and we love you. And you can come forward now as we stand and sing.